In 1980, 17-year-old Leah Hale vanished after leaving a lakeside graduation party in the small town of Harbor's End. The search lasted months, then years, until it faded like the morning fog the town was famous for. 20 years later, her father is still packing away her room when that same fog rolls in again. Martin Hale stands in the doorway, looking at a world that hasn't changed since the night she disappeared. The calendar on her wall still reads June 1980. Her denim jacket still hangs on the chair. A record rests on the turntable, needle lifted mid-song as if time itself refused to finish what it started. He opens a cardboard box marked Leah, meaning to finally let go. Old notebooks, seashell bracelets, cassette tapes, each one heavier than it should be. Then he finds her high school yearbook, the one he could never bring himself to open. He hesitates, thumb on the edge of the cover. The sound of the lake wind slips through the cracked window. Finally, he opens it. The pages gleam faintly under the pale light, filled with the faces of kids who grew up, moved away, started lives. And there, her smile, bright, unstoppable, frozen in a single moment. But just below her printed name written in the blue ink, he notices something he's never seen before. Amy, return my Minolta. The roll's still inside. A heart's Leah. Martin frowns. Amy Cole, Leah's best friend. The Minolta camera had been Leah's obsession, a birthday gift he'd saved for months to buy. But the police never found it during the investigation. His pulse quickens. He starts opening drawers, searching through boxes until his hands brush against something solid and cold, a small black Minolta X700 tucked beneath a folded sweater. He lifts it out. Dust slides off the lens. The leather strap is cracked, the shutter button stiff. He winds the lever. It resists slightly, stopping at frame 23 of 24, almost full. He sits on the edge of her bed, heart thudding. For 20 years, this camera has been locked away in silence. What if that last roll of film still holds something she saw, something no one else did? His fingers tremble as he releases the latch and cracks open the camera's back. A faint smell of chemicals and dust escapes. Inside, the film leader glints amber, still wound tight, never exposed to light, undeveloped. For a moment, Martin can't move. Then he whispers, Leah, what were you trying to show me? Outside, the fog presses closer to the window pane, blurring the world beyond. He closes the camera carefully, sets it on the desk beside her yearbook, and exhales. After 2 decades of silence, his daughter had just spoken again through a single unfinished roll of film. The summer of 1980 was the kind people still talk about in Harbor's End. Long evenings, soft winds off the lake, and the smell of bonfire smoke drifting through the pines. The town sat quiet by the water, the kind of place where everyone waved, where nothing truly bad ever happened. At least, not yet. June 14th, graduation night. The docks behind Miller's Point were alive with teenagers saying goodbye to childhood. Someone had built a fire pit from driftwood and pallets, and country songs played from a portable radio balanced on a cooler. Bottles clinked, laughter carried across the dark lake. Leah Hale was there too, 17, full of plans, wearing a yellow cardigan she'd knitted herself. She had told her parents she'd be home by 11. She wasn't the loudest in the group, or the wildest. She was the one taking photos. Her Minolta camera slung over her shoulder, capturing faces lit by firelight and sparks. Friends remembered her smiling, saying she wanted one last roll before college. Around 10:40, the fireworks started. A small display, nothing official, just a few older boys with leftover 4th of July stock. People cheered, Couples drifted toward their cars, and Leah told her best friend Amy she'd catch a ride home soon. That was the last confirmed conversation anyone had with her. By midnight, the lake road was empty except for the echo of frogs and distant music. A fisherman out late saw a blue Camaro idling near the dock. He remembered because of the license plate frame, engraved with Mercer Auto. He assumed it was one of the town's older kids, waiting for a girlfriend. He didn't think much of it. The next morning, Martin Hale woke early to the sound of the kettle and silence from Leah's room. Her bed was made, her shoes still by the door. When she hadn't called by noon, her mother started phoning friends. By evening, the police were notified. The search began the same day. Volunteers combed the shoreline. Officers dragged sections of the lake. Dogs were brought in. Flyers went up in grocery stores and gas stations. Missing, Leah H. Hale, age 17. Last seen wearing yellow cardigan. For the first week, the whole town searched. The second week, people began to whisper. Police reports called it possible runaway behavior. She just graduated, maybe stressed, maybe wanted space. One deputy suggested boyfriend trouble. Another said she was probably up north with friends. Martin never believed that. He knew his daughter. She didn't run. By September, the search was scaled back. The divers stopped coming. The posters curled in the summer heat. The name Leah Hale became something said quietly, like a bad memory. The Hales kept her room the same. They left the porch light on every night for nearly a decade. Neighbors avoided their eyes in grocery aisles. Pity had a way of sounding like guilt in small towns. Martin tried to keep working at the mill, but everything reminded him of her. The smell of sawdust, like the boards they used at the search site, the hum of the siren they'd sounded that first night. He and Elaine stopped talking about when she comes back and began saying nothing at all. Years later, when the police closed the case as inactive, presumed deceased, Martin sat in his truck outside the station for hours before driving home. The detective shook his hand, offered the same line he'd heard 100 times. You did everything you could, but in the file they returned to him, a thick folder of typed statements, maps, and dead ends. One line stood out near the end of the property log. Personal effects recovered: purse, jacket, ring. Missing items: camera, Minolta, shoes, white canvas, wallet. Unrecovered personal item. He'd read that phrase so many times over the years it stopped sounding like English. It was just code for something that never came back. Sometimes on fog-heavy mornings, Martin swore he could still hear the echo of that summer. Fireworks faint on the wind, laughter across the lake, the click of a camera shutter somewhere in the distance. But the photos from that night were never found. Not until 20 years later, when he opened her yearbook and found that note, the one that led him back to the camera that had seen everything. The photo lab looked like a museum piece that forgot to close, a sun-faded Kodak poster curled in the front window. The bell above the door gave a tired ring when Martin pushed it open, bringing a breath of lake air and the faint smell of developer that never quite leaves a room like this. "Morning," the owner said, without looking up. He was a small man in a gray cardigan, wire frames perched low on his nose, counting slide mounts like rosary beads. When he finally glanced over, his eyes softened. "Martin Hale, haven't seen you in years." Martin set the Minolta on the counter as if it were evidence. "This roll's been inside since 1980, he said. "Can you try?" The man lifted the camera gently, thumbed the rewind knob, listened to the whisper of film against metal. His mouth drew into a thin line. 40-year-old stock, might be brittle, might be fogged. He met Martin's eyes. No promises. I don't need promises, Martin said. Just whatever's there. The owner nodded once and disappeared into the dark room, the red safe light glowing to life like an ember. Behind the swinging door, trays clinked, water hissed, time bent back on itself. Martin stood alone among relics, plastic frames for 35mm slides, a spinner rack of disposable cameras no one bought anymore, envelopes waiting for names that would never come. He picked up a cracked magnifier from a dish and turned it in his hand until the bell rang again and a teenage boy stepped in, looked around, then back out. Wrong century, kid, Martin thought. 10 minutes stretched to 20. The hum of a dryer, the soft drumbeat of dripping taps. Then the door swung and the owner came out, holding a strip of negatives with tongs, wet and amber, the frames like small windows into time. He peered at them against the overhead light. You got lucky, he said, a hint of surprise in his voice. Thin but printable, 23 frames readable, one maybe double exposed, ghosted. Let me see, Martin said, the words dry. They laid the strip on a light box that still worked and turned the switch. The frames lit up like a secret map. The owner slid a loop toward him. Martin bent in. Frame 3, Leah's school corridor. Lockers, posters for the spring concert, a teacher waving from the end of the hall. Frame 5, a parade down Harbor's End, Maine. Kids in band uniforms, marching off beat, a banner sagging between two poles. Frame 9, the marina at dusk, boats bobbing, a gull caught mid-flap. Each picture felt ordinary, almost painfully so. But the ordinary was why he'd come. Ordinary as proof of a life that was lived. Frame 12, Amy laughing, head thrown back, a smear of light across the lens where a finger had brushed the glass. Frame 16, Leah's yellow cardigan sleeve in the edge of the shot, as if she had turned the camera on herself and missed. Martin smiled despite himself. She was always impatient with self-portraits. Then frame 18, he leaned closer, breath held, a storefront window, Leah in the reflection, soft, grainy, hair falling across her cheek as she raised the camera. And behind her, blurred by the glass but unmistakable, a hand lifted near her shoulder, not touching, hanging there in strange pause. On the ring finger, a signet ring with a dark stone and a squared-off bezel. Distinct, not the kind you buy at the 5 and dime. Martin swallowed. Can you enlarge this? He asked quietly. The owner adjusted the loop, tilted the strip, frowned. We can pull detail, he said. Don't expect miracles. He moved to the enlarger, slid the negative into the carrier, focused until the grain danced and exposed a sheet. The paper went into developer. The image rose out of the white like a memory surfacing through fog. Leah's reflection, the ghost hand behind her, the ring catching a sliver of light. Even the old emulsion hadn't lost. They printed 2 more from different exposures. The ring stayed. That squared bezel, a shallow engraving on the side, a shape Martin couldn't name but felt he'd seen. He kept going. Frame 20, posters stapled to a telephone pole. Frame 21, a campaign table on the school lawn, kids handing out pins. Frame 22, Leah's friends at the bonfire, the smoke a soft veil over faces he remembered too well. Then frame 23, not a person, not even Leah. Just the edge of a brick wall, a doorway chalked with flyers. The print cut off half the words, but the bold type at the top still shouted through time, Vote Gavin Mercer, Youth Council 80. Below the headline, a partial headshot of a handsome boy in a tie looked out with polished confidence. The bottom tear-off tabs showed a phone number. Someone had ripped most of them away. The owner looked over Martin's shoulder. Mercer, he murmured. That one turned into a big deal around here. City council, development money, bought half the quarry land out by State 6. Martin felt a slow, heavy beat in his chest. The boys at the lake had talked about a blue Camaro. Mercer's family owned a dealership back then, Mercer Auto. He remembered the chrome license plate frames, the clean polish, the way their commercials ran before the evening news. He glanced back at frame 18, to the signet ring, then to the campaign flyer in 23. The two images sat on the counter like puzzle pieces that didn't yet touch, but wanted to. "What about the last frame?" he asked. The owner's mouth tightened. He lifted the strip and pointed. "Frame 24 is there physically," he said, "but the emulsion's torn near the sprockets. See this scar?" Martin looked. A jagged notch tore into the image area, as if someone had pried the back open mid-roll. The negative was milky in the corner, fog bleeding into the rectangle like spilled milk. Whatever a moment had once lived there had been scraped away by time, or by a hand in a hurry. "So someone opened the camera," Martin said. "Once," the owner replied. "A long time ago. Before now." He set the strip back down and exhaled through his nose. "We can salvage some shadow in the upper half, but the frame was exposed to light. And if someone yanked the leader, they might have done it to stop a shot from being taken. Or to stop one from being seen," Martin said, more to himself than to the room. They made a contact sheet of all 23 viable frames and a cautious enlargement from 24, just a fogged smear of geometry, a hint of a vertical line that could have been a door jamb or nothing at all. The owner slid the prints into an envelope, wrote the date in the corner, and offered it across the counter like a fragile thing. "Whatever you're doing with this," he said, "be careful." Martin nodded. He tucked the envelope under his arm, picked up the Minolta, and stood there a moment longer, listening to the dryer's low spin, the way it hummed like the inside of a seashell. Outside, the day had brightened, but the fog still hung low over the water, stubborn as grief. He walked to his truck and set the envelope on the passenger seat. Frame 18, a ring behind his daughter's shoulder. Frame 23, a name in bold type, Gavin Mercer. And frame 24, blank, torn, as if someone once cracked the camera open and tried to erase the last thing Leah ever tried to show. He started the engine and pulled onto Main. The parade route from frame 5 was quiet now. Storefronts blinking awake, flags lifting in the breeze. On a brick wall by the corner cafe, a newer poster smiled down at him. "Councilman Gavin Mercer, Town Hall tonight, 6 p.m. Martin's pulse slowed to something steady and cold. He didn't speed. He didn't swerve. He just drove toward the afternoon as if it were a meeting he'd been late to for 20 years. The house was quiet, except for the slow tick of the kitchen clock and the low hum of the refrigerator, the kind of silence that had learned to live with the Hales. Martin sat at the dining table, the yearbook open under a reading lamp. The pages were stiff, their edges yellowing. On Leah's page, her handwriting glowed faintly blue under the light. "Amy, return my Minolta." He turned another page. Halfway through the senior section, he found the face that now refused to leave his thoughts. Gavin Mercer. His grin was wide, confident, almost cinematic. Class president, basketball captain, student council chair, debate finalist. Under his name was a quote that sounded rehearsed even on paper. "Leadership is service, and service builds legacy." Martin stared at the photograph until it blurred. This boy, this smile, had grown into a man who still smiled for cameras, a man whose name now hung from banners around town. He flipped to the back of the yearbook. There it was again, Mercer shaking hands with the principal, posing with the school board, arms slung around teammates, always centered, always composed. Martin went to his study. In a drawer, he kept a shoebox of local papers, old clippings from the years after Leah disappeared. He spread them out, careful not to smudge the brittle pages. Front page, local teen wins state speech contest. Another, Mercer Motors expands to second dealership. Then, young entrepreneur joins City Youth Council. There, in one grainy black and white photo from 1981, Mercer stood beside his father's blue Camaro, a ribbon stretched across the dealership lot behind him. Martin exhaled. He folded the clipping, slipped it into his pocket, and looked at the clock. 5:10 p.m. He grabbed his coat, that poster he'd seen earlier. Councilman Gavin Mercer, Town Hall meeting, 6 p.m. was still taped outside the cafe. He would go, just to look, just to hear his voice. The community hall smelled of varnish and coffee. Rows of plastic chairs faced a small stage where a projector screen displayed slides of proposed development for Harbor's End. The lights dimmed as a well-dressed man approached the podium. Gavin Mercer looked exactly like his photographs. Same controlled smile, same calm politician's rhythm in his voice. The hair had gone silver at the edges, which somehow made him look more trustworthy. He spoke about revitalizing the waterfront, preserving heritage, bringing opportunity home. People nodded, clapped politely. Martin sat near the back, hands clasped, feeling his heartbeat behind his ribs. The voice was smooth, too smooth. When the presentation ended, Mercer stepped off the stage, sleeves rolled up, moving easily through the crowd. Shaking hands, remembering names, he made everyone feel like they mattered. When he reached Martin's row, he offered the same warm smile. "Evening, sir. Gavin Mercer." Martin rose, taking the handshake. "Martin Hale." Mercer's grip was firm, practiced. "Glad you came out tonight, Mr. Hale. We need more long-timers giving input. You from around Harbor's End?" "Born and raised." Martin's voice was steady, almost casual. "My daughter went to school here too, class of '80. Mercer nodded politely. "Ah, the good old days. Great class, that one. A lot of strong names came out of it." "Yes," Martin said. "Leah Hale." For the first time, Mercer's expression faltered, only for a heartbeat, a tiny fracture behind the smile. His hand stiffened before letting go. "Leah," he repeated quietly. "Yes, I remember her." The words came too carefully, like each one had to be weighed before release. "She disappeared after graduation," Martin said. "You must remember the search." Mercer's eyes dropped for the briefest second. "Terrible thing," he said softly. "That was decades ago, wasn't it? I think my dad helped with some of the volunteer drives." He was already turning toward the next group when Martin added, "You knew her, didn't you?" Mercer froze. The room hummed with low conversation. Somewhere, a coffee cup clinked against a saucer. When he turned back, his expression had reset, professional again. "We went to school together. Everyone knew everyone then." Martin nodded slowly. "You were close, though. There's a photo, a campaign table. You were talking to her." Mercer's eyes flickered. "I had a lot of campaign tables. Did you drive a blue Camaro?" That did it. The faintest twitch at the corner of Mercer's jaw. A microsecond of silence before he answered. "My father did," he said smoothly. "Half the boys in town borrowed it at one point. Why?" Martin held his gaze. "Just curious. Someone remembered seeing one near the docks that night." Mercer's smile thinned, then returned, brighter but hollow now. "Old memories," he said lightly, "and unreliable ones. I'd be careful chasing ghosts, Mr. Hale. They make people see what they want to see." He patted Martin's shoulder in a practiced gesture that was meant to disarm, but it only chilled. Then he moved on, greeting the next person, voice already warm again. Martin stood where he was for a moment, the chatter dimming around him. He felt something like nausea, not fear, but confirmation. On stage, Mercer took the microphone again for closing remarks. As he lifted his hand to wave, the light caught his finger. There, just above the knuckle, a faint pale line encircled the skin, a mark where a ring had once rested for years, and now it was gone. By Thursday, the weather had turned. A low sky hung over Harbor's End like damp wool, the kind that made the lake look metallic and the air taste of rust. Martin hadn't planned to follow him. That's what he told himself, at least. He just wanted to see where the councilman spent his afternoons. But when he spotted Gavin Mercer's black sedan pulling away from the Civic Building at 3:40 p.m., the thought of not following felt impossible. He waited a beat, then started the truck and slipped into traffic, a few cars behind. Mercer drove like a man who knew the roads well, calm, measured, never too fast. He passed the turnoff toward his dealership offices, kept going west, then veered onto a narrow county road that wound through stands of cedar and pine. Out here, the town thinned quickly. Old barns leaned into the fields. Fences sagged under the weight of years. Martin stayed back far enough to keep his headlights out of view. The road climbed steadily until the trees gave way to an open ridge. A chain-link fence appeared ahead, topped with a warning sign, Mercer Development, private property. Beyond it stretched the old limestone quarry, long abandoned, the pit half filled with green water and surrounded by chalk-white cliffs. The town had once tried to turn it into a scenic overlook before Mercer bought the land. Now it sat empty, a place people forgot existed. Mercer slowed at the gate, entered a code, and rolled through. Martin eased off the road and cut the engine. The rain had started again, soft at first, tapping the hood like static. Through the windshield, he could see Mercer's car follow a gravel path to the far edge of the quarry. From this distance, Martin could only make out the movements. Mercer stepping out, opening the trunk. He pulled something heavy into his arms, a small metal ammo box, army green, corners dented. In his other hand, a bouquet of white flowers wrapped in brown paper. He walked toward the overlook, a rise of land that jutted toward the pit like a balcony. The wind caught his coat, lifted the flowers slightly. Martin grabbed his binoculars from the glove compartment, the same pair he used during the early search days decades ago. He steadied them against the steering wheel. Mercer was kneeling now, about 20 feet from the edge. He dug with a small folding spade, working slowly, almost reverently. Then he placed the ammo box into the earth and rested the bouquet on top. For a long moment, he stayed like that, one knee on the ground, head bowed. Martin couldn't hear the words, but he saw the man's lips move. Whatever he was saying, it wasn't a prayer. It was quieter, more personal. Then a gust of wind tore through the clearing. Something slipped from Mercer's coat pocket, a small rectangle of paper that caught the wind and fluttered out across the gravel. He turned, startled, but the gust carried it beyond his reach. Martin raised his camera, a new one now, digital but small, and snapped a photo before the paper disappeared into the weeds. Through the zoom, he caught just enough, faded print, a torn edge, and a glimpse of red ink. Mercer didn't chase it. He simply looked after it, still for a moment, then filled the hole back in with the precision of someone who'd done it before. He pressed the soil flat with his palms, arranged the flowers neatly, and stood. When he turned toward his car, Martin ducked low. His pulse hammered in his ears. The engine of Mercer's sedan started, the sound dull in the rain. Gravel crunched as the car turned around and disappeared back down the road. Martin waited until the sound was gone completely. Only then did he step out into the drizzle, the cold biting through his coat. The air smelled of wet stone and iron. The ground where Mercer had knelt was easy to find. A dark, fresh patch of soil surrounded by tire marks. He didn't touch it. Not yet. He crouched, scanning the ground until he spotted it, the paper the wind had carried, now caught in a clump of grass near the fence. He eased it free. It was damp but legible, a ticket stub, half faded. June 14th, 1980. Harbor's End Waterfront Pavilion. The same night Leah disappeared, Martin felt the world tilt slightly, that slow, dizzy kind of realization that doesn't rush in but seeps. He took a photograph of the stub in his hand, then another of the burial spot, with the flowers still standing upright, white against the gray stone. His fingers were shaking when he got back into the truck. The rain had stopped, but the windshield was streaked with mud and mist. He set the camera on the passenger seat beside the photo envelope from the lab. Frame 18, Leah's reflection with the ring. Frame 23, Mercer's campaign flyer. Now this, a stub from the same night. The pieces weren't touching yet, but they were circling each other, closing the gap inch by inch. He sat there, engine off, the only sound the ticking of cooling metal. For a long time, he just stared at the quarry through the fence, the hole in the earth, the flowers swaying faintly in the wind, the man's secret buried just beneath the surface. Finally, under his breath, he whispered the words he'd been holding since the moment he saw Mercer's face in the yearbook. I need to know. By the time Martin turned the truck back onto the main road, the sky had already gone the color of lead. The quarry sat behind him like a wound in the land, silent, waiting. He should have gone home, told Elaine. Let the police handle it. That's what any reasonable man would have done. But 20 years of waiting had carved reason into something thinner, more fragile. By dusk, he was back. The fence looked darker now, the warning sign half lit by the headlights. He parked farther up the road this time, beneath a cluster of trees, and cut the engine. His breath fogged the windshield. He reached for the small camcorder on the seat beside him, the kind his son-in-law had used to film the kids' birthdays years ago. He tested the red light. Still worked. The battery meter blinked low, but there was enough for a few minutes. Enough to prove he wasn't crazy. He dialed a number written on a torn notepad. Ron Keller, the retired detective who had led Leah's case back in 1980. The phone rang twice. Yeah? The voice was rough, older but familiar. Ron, it's Martin Hale. A pause. Martin, been a long time. I found something, Martin said. At the quarry, Mercer's land. Keller hesitated. What kind of something? A box. He buried a box. The line went quiet except for static. Then, don't touch it. You hear me? Sit tight. I'll call it in. I can't, Martin said softly. You know I can't. Martin. But he'd already hung up. He left the phone on the dashboard and grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment. The air smelled of rain and iron. He crossed the road, boots sinking slightly into the wet gravel, and found the patch of ground where Mercer had knelt earlier that day. The flowers were still there, bent now, their white petals heavy with moisture. Martin set the camcorder on a rock, aimed it toward the spot, and pressed record. The red light blinked in the dark. He started to dig. The soil was soft, freshly turned, easy to move. Each shovel stroke came faster than the last, fueled by adrenaline, by years of sleepless nights. Within minutes, metal scraped against metal, the ammo box. He dropped to his knees, brushing dirt away with his hands. The latch was stiff with rust, but not locked. A small click. The lid lifted. Inside lay a tape recorder, the old kind, black plastic, buttons faded from years of use. A handful of paper clippings and photographs were stacked beside it, edges curled and damp. Martin reached for the tape recorder. It was heavier than it looked. The label on the cassette read in neat, precise letters, June 14, 1980, keep safe. He turned it over once, thumb brushing the play button. Then he hesitated, a sound behind him, gravel shifting. He froze. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. A voice, low and controlled. You shouldn't be here, Mr. Hale. Martin turned. Gavin Mercer stood at the edge of the clearing, coat collar up, rain slicking his hair. His face was pale in the flashlight beam, eyes dark and steady. How did you... Martin began. I saw your truck, Mercer cut in. I figured you might come back. You weren't supposed to find that. He took a step closer, eyes flicking to the camcorder's blinking light. Turn that off. Martin stood, clutching the box. This is evidence, he said. You buried something here. It's not what you think, Mercer snapped. Put it down. Martin shook his head. Tell me where she is. Mercer's jaw clenched. You don't want the truth. Another step closer. The tension in the air coiled tighter. Martin's hand slipped slightly on the recorder. It hit the ground, the play button clicking down as it landed. A hiss, then static, and then a voice, Leah's voice, soft, trembling, but clear enough to slice through the years. Please, I just want to go home. Martin went still. His throat closed, the sound of her alive and pleading after all this time. It didn't feel real. Mercer froze too, staring at the recorder like it was something radioactive. Turn it off, he shouted. Martin reached for the phone in his pocket, fumbling for the SOS shortcut. Mercer lunged forward. The two men collided. A flash of movement, dirt scattering, the recorder skidding across the ground. Stay back, Martin yelled, grabbing the shovel as he stumbled to his feet. Mercer's voice cracked under the pressure. You weren't supposed to find it. It was buried. It was done. In the distance, faint but rising, the wail of sirens. Red and blue lights flickered against the trees as squad cars crested the hill. Mercer looked toward them, panic breaking through the polished mask for the first time. Don't, he hissed, backing away. You don't know what this will do. But the sound of tires on gravel grew louder, closer. Officers shouted commands through the night. Mercer's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him as flashlights cut across the clearing. It was supposed to stay buried, he muttered, almost to himself. Not anymore, Martin said. Two officers closed in, weapons drawn. Mercer didn't resist when they took him down, cuffing his wrists behind his back. Another officer guided Martin away from the hole, steadying him by the arm. You all right, sir? Martin nodded weakly. That box. Get the box. They retrieved it carefully, photographing it under the headlights, before sealing it in an evidence bag. One of them held up the cassette tape, labeling it before placing it in a separate container. As Martin watched, a forensic tech shined a UV light across the plastic casing. Under the glow, faint smudges appeared, ridges and loops pressed into the dust of decades. The tech looked up. We've got fingerprints, more than one set. He paused, eyes meeting Martin's. The older ones looked small, likely female. Martin didn't move, couldn't. His daughter's voice still echoed in his ears. Please, I just want to go home. Now finally she was. The recording room at the Harbor's End Police Department smelled faintly of dust and burned coffee, the kind of room where truth came out slowly, in pieces. The tape recorder from the ammo box sat in the center of the table, connected to a small digital deck. Detective Ramirez, head of cold case reinvestigations, adjusted the levels, her face drawn tight with focus. Across from her, Martin Hale sat with his hands folded, knuckles white. He hadn't slept since that night at the quarry. Neither, it seemed, had anyone else. The digitization process took hours. The old tape hissed, popped, warped in places. But when Leah's voice came through, the entire room went still. "Please, I just want to go home." Then a man's voice, Mercer's, unmistakable, even after decades of polish, calm at first, almost gentle. "You will, but not yet. We need to talk first." The next 5 minutes were fragments of conversation spliced with background noise. Waves, a door creaking, the muffled sound of crying. He told her she owed him time, that she needed to stop making him the villain. Each word twisted something deeper in Martin's chest, another stretch of static. Then her voice again, smaller now. "You said you'd take me home after the party." A pause, a sharp metallic sound, like a door latch. His voice drops. "Don't make this harder than it already is." The rest dissolved into muffled scuffling, a single cry, then silence. When the recording ended, no one spoke. The detective hit stop and sat back slowly. "That's all?" Martin asked quietly. "There's a second side," Ramirez said. "We'll handle that one with forensics present." She looked at him, her expression gentle but firm. "You shouldn't have to hear the rest." Martin stared at the tape deck for a long moment. "I've already heard the worst." By morning, Mercer was in custody. His official statement changed 3 times. First, he claimed it was consensual, then an accident. Finally, a misunderstanding that got out of hand, but the evidence didn't bend as easily as his story. Inside the ammo box, investigators had found Leah's diary pages, the corners torn, the ink smudged but legible enough. They were written in her neat handwriting, sentences careful and hesitant. "He's not like how people say he is. He just needs someone to see the good in him. I think he's lonely. I think I can help. If I'm wrong about him, I'll have no one to blame but myself." The later entries darkened, the writing slanted. "He gets angry when I talk about leaving. He says no one else would understand us. Amy keeps asking questions. I told her to stop. I don't want her near him." The final note was the hardest to read, half torn and water-stained. "He said we'd talk by the lake. I told him it's not love if I'm scared of him." That was the night she disappeared. At the quarry, the forensic team returned under full daylight. The ground around the flowers was cordoned off, every inch cataloged. They worked quietly, the sound of shovels against damp soil breaking the silence. Detective Ramirez crouched near the hole where Martin had found the ammo box. "There's disturbance deeper down," one of the techs said, brushing away loose earth. They widened the search, moving slow, layer by layer. 2 feet down, the soil changed color, darker, denser. Then a scrap of fabric, almost black with age, but still holding its weave. "Clothing," the tech murmured. "Female cut. Cotton poly blend, late 70s style." They dug further. A shoe fragment, white canvas with rusted eyelets. Then a small gold chain, snapped in 2. By the time the afternoon light started to fade, they had found what 20 years of rain, frost, and roots had failed to erase. The delicate curve of a human femur, the tiny crown of a tooth, a partial jaw. Detective Ramirez closed her eyes for a moment. Mark it, photograph everything. Martin stood behind the tape line, silent. He didn't move closer, didn't cry. He just watched. For the first time since 1980, he had no questions left, only answers that hurt to know. 2 days later, the coroner's office called. Ramirez asked him to come in person. On the stainless steel table sat a small evidence tray with a few labeled items, a gold chain, a tooth fragment, and a sealed envelope. "We confirmed with dental records," Ramirez said quietly. "The fillings match. The orthodontic pattern, too. It's her." Martin nodded, though he'd already known the moment they called. He picked up the envelope. Inside was a printed copy of the forensic note: "Identification, Leah H. Hale, Dob 3 of 63." He traced her name with his thumb. The letters that once spelled promise now reduced to data. Ramirez spoke again, softer. "There's something else. On the cassette from the box." The fingerprint analysis came back. Martin looked up. "They're hers, the older ones. She touched that tape, probably right before he did." He didn't answer. He just nodded, eyes fixed on the label he'd memorized from that night. June 14, 1980. Keep safe, safe. The irony cut deeper than anything else. He left the station carrying the envelope against his chest, as if warmth could still reach what was long gone. Outside, the fog was rolling in again, thick, familiar, endless. For 20 years, he had begged for one thing: proof that she hadn't simply vanished. Now he had it, but proof was colder than hope. The news broke quietly. No flashing headlines, no breaking coverage. Just a short column in the Harbor's End Chronicle. "Remains identified in 1980 disappearance. Local businessman in custody." For most readers, it was a footnote to a tragedy they'd already filed away decades ago. But inside the police station, the case still breathed. Detective Ramirez sat with a stack of typed statements, her pen tapping against the paper. Across from her sat Amy Cole, eyes red, hands trembling around a styrofoam cup. She hadn't been back in this building since the first days of the search, back when she was just a scared 17-year-old being asked the same questions over and over. Now she was 40 and still carrying the same guilt. "I thought I was protecting her," Amy said, her voice cracking. "She called me that night, twice." Ramirez looked up. "What did she say?" Amy wiped her eyes with a tissue, staring at the table. "She said she'd gone to meet him, Gavin. She said it was just to talk, to make things right. She sounded nervous, but calm. Said he promised to drive her home." Her breathing quickened. "I told her not to go. I told her to just stay at the lake and I'd pick her up. But she said no. She said she needed to end it properly." Ramirez's pen stilled. "Why didn't you tell investigators this back then?" Amy looked up through tears. "Because I thought it would ruin her. I thought people would say she ran off with him, that she wasn't the girl they thought she was. I didn't want that to be her story." She exhaled, shoulders shaking. "But I guess hiding the truth didn't save her either." Ramirez closed the file gently. "You were a kid," she said, "the only one who still believed she was alive." Amy nodded weakly, whispering, "I just never stopped hearing her voice." That afternoon, Martin drove to the lake, the same shoreline where the search had started 20 years ago. The dock was gone now, the wood long replaced by a newer, shorter pier that jutted out into the water like a memory half erased. He stood at the edge, coat pulled tight, eyes on the shifting waves. This was where she'd taken her last photograph, where the old Minolta had seen something no one else did. He remembered that camera clearly, her pride, her constant companion. He'd promised once to fix the film advance lever when it jammed. Never got around to it. She'd laughed, said, "It gives the pictures character." He smiled faintly at the thought, a soundless kind of ache. Behind him, footsteps approached. Detective Ramirez joined him, her breath misting in the cold air. "We found something on the last frame," she said. Martin turned slightly. "The one that was damaged. The torn negative. Our forensic imaging team stabilized it. It's faint, but clear enough to see." She handed him an envelope. "I thought you'd want to be the first." He hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a print, grainy, monochrome, edges burned by time. Leah stood on the pier, sunlight flaring behind her. She was smiling, a small, unguarded smile, as if caught off guard by whoever was behind the lens. The image was soft, slightly blurred, the world around her fading into light. Ramirez spoke quietly. "It's the same pier, same day. We think she took it as a self-timer, probably minutes before meeting him." Martin ran his fingers along the edges of the photo, tracing the faint outline of her face. "She looks happy," he said. "She might have been," Ramirez replied. "Maybe she thought it was finally over." They stood there for a long while, the water restless below them. Then Ramirez continued, more analytical now. "We went through Mercer's old campaign records. His rideshare program, you remember? The one where volunteers drove classmates home after school events?" Martin nodded. "It wasn't random. He kept the list in his own handwriting, marked which girls preferred which drivers. Leah's name shows up 3 times, all with his initials beside it. He used the program to isolate her." Her tone hardened. "He built trust by pretending to protect her." Martin's jaw tightened, and no one saw it. "He made sure of that," Ramirez said. "Every predator hides behind something noble." A gust of wind swept across the pier, carrying the smell of rain and pine. Martin tucked the photo back into the envelope, holding it carefully as if it might break. "She was always looking for the good in people," he murmured, "even when it wasn't there." Ramirez said nothing. Some truths didn't need answers. As the sun began to set, the lake caught the last of the light, a thin ribbon of gold stretching toward the horizon. Martin stood at the edge, the water lapping against the wood. He reached into his coat pocket and took out the envelope again, pulling the photo into the fading light. The grain shimmered faintly in the dusk, Leah's smile glowing against the glare. He thought about the note in the yearbook, the Minolta, the camera that outlasted them all, about how she had left him the only thing she could, a story told in fragments of light and shadow. He whispered it so quietly that only the wind and the water could hear. She knew. He closed his eyes. The sound of the waves filled the space where her voice used to be. Then softer, one final truth. She left proof. A week later, the fog lifted from Harbor's End for the first time in days. The lake looked calm again, smooth, silver, almost forgiving. Several small boats drifted out across the water in a quiet procession. There were no sirens, no reporters, no cameras, just family, a few friends, and the detectives who had stayed until the end. The air smelled of pine and salt. Seagulls circled overhead, their calls fading into the wind. Martin Hale sat at the bow of the lead boat, his hands steady on the small urn in his lap. Elaine sat beside him, eyes on the horizon, her fingers gripping his sleeve as if to make sure he didn't drift too far, not just across the water, but anywhere she couldn't follow. Behind them, in a second boat, Amy Cole held a basket of white forget-me-nots, their petals trembling in the breeze. Detective Ramirez was there too, quiet, observing, no longer in charge of a case, but a witness to closure. The motor hummed softly as they reached the center of the lake, the deepest point. Ramirez gave a nod to cut the engine. Silence filled the air, broken only by the gentle slap of waves against the hull. Martin rose slowly, the urn in his hands. The light caught the edges of it, brushed metal, simple, unadorned. He cleared his throat once before speaking, his voice barely above the water's hush. Leah always said the lake looked different every day. Some mornings blue, some green, sometimes gray, but never the same twice. She said that was proof the world kept moving, even when we couldn't. He looked down at the water, the reflection of the sky rippling beneath him. We tried to stop time, to hold the day she left, but time doesn't stop. It just waits for you to catch up. Elaine placed her hand over his, and together they tipped the urn. Ash drifted out in a pale stream, dissolving as it touched the surface. Amy leaned over the side of her boat and began scattering the forget-me-nots. Handful after handful, the white flowers floated in clusters, spreading across the lake like stars scattered on glass. For a while, no one spoke. The water carried its own eulogy, a slow, rhythmic sound that felt almost like breathing. Ramirez bowed her head, whispering something too soft to hear. The other boats followed, each releasing flowers, until the water was a mosaic of white and silver drifting toward the shore. When it was done, Martin sat again, the empty urn between his feet. He looked toward the cliffs in the distance, the place where Mercer had buried his secrets. The wind moved through the reeds, carrying the faint smell of rain and stone. "She's home now," he said quietly. Elaine nodded, tears sliding down her face, but her expression peaceful at last. Amy reached across the gap between the boats and took her hand. No one needed words. That evening, the house felt different, lighter somehow. The boxes in Leah's room were still there, but now the door stood open, letting the evening sun pour through. On the hallway wall, near the family photographs, hung a small shadow box, freshly cleaned glass, simple frame. Inside, the restored Minolta X700 sat like an artifact of another world. Beside it, one photo. Leah on the pier, sunlight flaring behind her, the faintest smile on her face, the last picture she ever took, and the one she'd left for them to find. Beneath it, a brass nameplate read simply, Leah Hale, 1963 till 1980. She never stopped speaking. Martin stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, the faint hum of the lake wind through the open window. The house didn't feel haunted anymore, just lived in, like it could finally exhale. In the background, a faint click, the sound of the old clock restarting after years of silence. Martin's voice came in softly, like a closing narration. Sometimes the smallest thing, a note, a picture, a sound, waits in the dark until you're ready to see it. My daughter never came home, but she still told her story. The camera lingered on the photo, Leah's smile, blurred by time but still radiant, before tilting slowly upward toward the window where sunlight shimmered across the wall. Outside, the lake caught the light and scattered it, each ripple glinting like film grain rolling over the water. The image held for a long moment, then faded into white. The screen fades from white to the gentle shimmer of lake water at dusk. For a moment, all is still. The camera drifts slowly beneath the surface, sunlight rippling through the shallows, touching the outline of something resting quietly on the lake bed. It's a single forget-me-not, tangled in reeds, swaying with the current. The petals are pale, luminous, unbroken. Then we cut to the Hale home. Night now. Warm lamplight glowing through the windows. Elaine sits at the table writing a letter to the state archive, donating Leah's recovered belongings to the local museum. Amy helps frame a copy of Leah's final photograph for the display. And Martin, standing in the hallway, reaches up and adjusts the camera strap one last time, steadying it like a father fixing something small for his child. Outside, the lake wind rises again, soft, endless, familiar. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that were almost lost to time. Every week, we uncover another voice that deserves to be heard. This was the role of film. Thank you for watching and for remembering